Extinction Rebellion worldwide, they've been doing a lot of nonviolent protests, blocking streets, blocking trains, really agitating working class people. Do you think that's the best way to get their message across?
I would really not focus on this one singular event. In the city where I'm from, in Berlin, Extinction Rebellion blocked the main traffic circle for about 3 days until they were evicted.
Germans just letting them whatever go down, apparently.
And I would say most people support this kind of interruptions, and we do need interruptions of the economy. That means working class people, but that also means the interruption of business as usual as it goes on in Blackrock and in other companies. And yes, there are people working in these companies. We stop working class people from getting to work, because the work we're doing at the moment, each and every single one of us, this work is destroying this planet, and we need to stop our daily activities as we do them right now and massively switch to a more sustainable lifestyle.
So we're out here today in front of Blackrock protesting about climate change. I see some of the protesters are blocking the entrance. Can you tell me a little bit more about why you guys are out here and the impact that Blackrock specifically is having?
BlackRock is the world's biggest backer of climate destruction. They control $7 trillion in assets, and they're the top investor into these kinds of climate-destroying activities: oil, gas, coal, deforestation. So that's why we're here, to send BlackRock a message that it's time to clean up their dirty act.
Absolutely. So I know there's a lot of options for pivoting off of fossil fuels. The United States recently reduced their emissions a little bit by pivoting onto natural gas. I wanted to ask you, are we strictly only advocating for renewables here, or does nuclear energy have some play? Maybe natural gas have any place here?
So natural gas, we think, is a misnomer. It's really fracked gas in the U.S., and it's just as polluting as coal because of methane emissions.
You get more bang for your buck CO2-wise with natural gas versus crude oil. That's why the U.S. has decreased their CO2 emissions. But I understand your point.
I actually don't agree with that. I think the main reason is because activists have been fighting it, and fracking caused gas prices to come down, which caused people to shift. But renewables are growing really fast, and that's what we want to see. Good jobs, especially good union jobs, hiring in communities of color, to create a clean energy economy that can create a Green New Deal. BlackRock is part of the problem right now, but they could be part of the solution. They actually should be putting their money, taking it out of oil, gas, and coal and forest destruction, putting that into renewable energy. And that would single-handedly be the biggest action, because they are the biggest Wall Street player of anyone.
I know you mentioned the Green New Deal. I don't know what your CO2 emission goals are, but the Green New Deal CO2 emission goals were net zero within 10 years. Do you think that's a plausible goal to really have? Because that would include all planes, that would include all cars, and that would include realistically all buildings too. So you think we could actually attain the net zero within 10 years?
Yes. Yeah, net zero is achievable. This country in World War II shifted on a dime to a war economy. This is the kind of mobilization that's needed to actually save our future. Right now, the climate crisis is already hitting. Today is the 7th anniversary of Hurricane Sandy. People died in New York City because of a climate-fueled event, right? Things are going to get dramatically worse in the future if we don't act right now. And that's the level of scale that's necessary, and that's the message we're here to send.
I hear politics.
I got to run, though.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Cheers.
If I gave the other address, it would have came up on.
So we're out here today in front of Blackrock, trying to talk about and protesting about climate change and the climate emergency. Can you tell me a little bit more about why you're out here and how Blackrock fits in the mix?
Sure. I mean, Blackrock is one of the largest, or actually I think the largest global funder of climate change. The Amazon is on fire because of Blackrock. Coal and natural gas is withdrawn from the earth on a daily basis because of Blackrock. They're doing a lot of harm in the world, and we're here to say, please join Team Human, be more human, and do something about this.
So I think it kind of goes hand in hand with your shirt. Your shirt says capitalism is the crisis. Do you think the underlying issue really driving climate change and driving those CO2 emissions in the world is capitalism?
Absolutely. I mean, that's why I made this shirt, for this occasion.
Oh, you made it?
I made this shirt for the occasion, yeah. Capitalism is a cancer on the earth. It's, constant growth is quite literally that. What is constant growth in the body? It's cancer.
It's an interesting metaphor.
Yeah, and I think we're dealing with that financially. And you see these, things like the earth are thought of as externalities in capitalism, right? So great profit is made At the cost of what? At the externalities of the earth being damaged, of humans suffering, of exploitation of many, many things, including humans and including natural resources.
I ask because is there like a government that's doing it right? Because I know China's increasing their CO2 emissions. I don't know what kind of government you consider them, but like, I don't know, even, I know this is going to be a ridiculous example, but like Stalin and Stalinists and like as far left as you really want to go, or like Mao's, those countries still contributed a lot of CO2 emissions. So it's like even with those forms of government, I don't know. But I ask because I know some of the XR people, some of the founders talk about how we need a societal shift. And in the Green New Deal, we talk about a societal shift. So do you think like moving off of capitalism is necessary to help treat this issue?
I think it's a really complicated issue, right? And I think there are ways, there are many ways it could manifest. There are many ways a healthier planet could manifest and a healthier human system can manifest. The way I see it, under the paradigm of capitalism, that really won't happen in the way that I would like it to see, or that I would like to see it manifest. I'm not going to go to bat for the Soviet Union. I agree with you in your critiques of their, environmental policy at least. But I mean, I do think that it's easy to look at that in a lens of like the now and judge the past.
The reason I ask is because detractors say that these movements, the green movements like XR and like the Green New Deal and like that, all are movements that are just socialism covering as climate concerns. So do you feel any of that, and is there any of that here? Or is this specifically for climate change? Because like, let's say they're capitalists worried about climate change, would they be welcome here per se or something like that?
Sure. I mean, I don't think these movements are discerning. For any movement to grow and be effective, it has to be large, right? So I would certainly hold a capitalist hand side by side and work with them on, bettering the world. We need to grow our coalitions, so I'm not at all opposed to that. But I think the heartbeat of the movement certainly is like anarchist and socialist and communist and drawing from these larger, more leftist perspectives.
Absolutely. And I had one last question. I know the Extinction Rebellion group specifically has been getting some beef recently because in places like London, in New York City, they're blocking streets, they're agitating the middle class. Do you think that's the best course of action to get like the public on your side?
It's one course of action that historically has proven very successful. People wouldn't know about Extinction Rebellion if they hadn't blocked the bridges in London, for instance, right?
Yeah.
So,
but is like bad notoriety, still considered good notoriety?
Is all press good press?
Good
I mean,
yeah.
I don't know, right? That's a debate, and like I said, none of this is exact science, right? So like we're figuring things out. Diversity of tactics is important to revolution. And the movement is exploring that, So some things work, some things don't. Some things are well received, some things aren't. So it's just a matter of always exploring that and teasing away what you can and trying to find a greater truth.
You mentioned exact science. Some politicians sound more Malthusian than others with how we have 10 years or some say 20. What do you think our realistic timeline is before we face some sort of extinction event or when shit's actually going to really hit the fan? Because people have been constantly saying 10 years, 10 years. It sounds like people are getting tired of that. Do you have a date that you are concerned about from when we need to commit to action?
I mean, I am not a scientist, so I'm not going to forward a date that I would prescribe to you or anyone else. I mean,
You hear 10 years, though, right?
I yield my trust in the science community, so I would advocate for listening to the scientists who really know this stuff.
Absolutely. In conclusion, was there anything else you wanted to mention?
That's about it. Yeah.
Thank you so much for your time, sir. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
you.
Where can I see this?
I have a YouTube channel. If you look up ELAD, the name of the channel is Barely Informed with Elad. I had one final question. One of the 15 founders of Extinction Rebellion said it wasn't a climate change issue, it was a societal problem. And they were trying to pivot off of capitalism, as I understand, to more of a socialistic society because they say that is what's sustainable. Do you think capitalism is the fundamental issue here with what's driving climate change?
Yes, in this scenario, but Stalinist society would probably go down
So with the Chinese Maoist society, or whatever society they have right now in China.
That's a capitalist system as well, with a remaining strong central government.
I guess how you define it, but yeah.
In general, I would think that Stalinism would have gone down the same or a similar pathway.
So not necessarily an issue with capitalism.
Oh, yeah, it is totally an issue with capitalism, as it is an issue with Stalinism. And I strongly believe that a more democratic society would be able to actually address this problem, because the fundamental problem of capitalism is, as Blackrock shows, this is not democratic. If a billionaire like Bezos or a Tesla guy can decide that they fuck the planet and want to go off to Mars, that is not democratic. And capitalism
I don't know if that's their plan, but yeah.
there is a fundamental lack of democracy in capitalism. And that's where this problem comes about, that most people don't matter in this society. Most people have not mattered under Stalinism, and I strongly believe that a more democratic and more centrally planned economy would be able to address this problem.
Why would a more centrally planned economy help address this problem?
And in this case, because we need a central planning to actually... This problem is so grave and so immense. If you look at the numbers, if you crunch this of turning the entire transport system alone to renewables, to mass public transport, that demands a focusing of the societal's production forces on these central issues for at least a decade or 2 decades to come.
I ask because it feels like at the end of the day, it's a carbon footprint issue with each individual person, right? I feel like if anything, we have too many people in society and would need to reduce the number of people in the greater society to help prevent their larger carbon footprint, right? To a certain degree.
That we need to impose population control.
I mean, it would reduce our carbon emissions, and if we were actually serious about needing to reduce the carbon emissions, and with the central planning.
So, I mean, if you know, seriously, like, if you look at the average...
Because the amount of people isn't sustainable, right? And the path we're on with our current population overall isn't sustainable.
I'm from Europe. Like, looking at the American carbon footprint is just appalling. You have a footprint of, what, 16 tons of GHGs
we contribute around 20% of the world CO2 emissions year over year.
This society is just appalling. And it is this society that is appalling. It is not necessarily Mali with its population that is appalling. It is this society in specific.
But how could the U.S. take the blame if it's only around 20% of the year-over-year CO2 emissions?
I mean, you need to take a per capita responsibility, and it should be per capita because, I mean, I suppose you and me, we believe in an egalitarian way that everybody has the right to live a certain lifestyle. A certain lifestyle, but not necessarily this type of lifestyle that is actually going against the rights of all 7 billion people, other 7 billion people on this planet. And
you think the government should be deciding what kind of lifestyle then that the citizens there should be able to have?
No, I mean, at the moment we do have a very critical issue about CO2 as a resource. So it's no longer about money being the main problem here. It's about CO2, and you can decide on your lifestyle as much as you want. If you can stay within 1 or 1.52 tons, you need to make your lifestyle decisions within that budget. But you as a person should be constrained to a CO2 budget, because every single person on this planet should have a right to CO2 emissions, and not only Americans and not only Europeans and not only rich people. So choose your lifestyle within 1.5 tons.
I don't know how much that is effectively, but just quickly in conclusion, was there anything else you wanted to mention?
No, I think there's some interesting protests going on here, and let's see what's happening over there.
Thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. It was a good conversation. So we're out here today in front of Blackrock. Your sign says Blackrock funds irreversible destruction. Can you tell me a little bit more about why you're out here, what Blackrock's implications here are?
Sure. Blackrock is obviously one of the biggest investment companies in the world, and I think the reason people are focusing on Blackrock is because of the hypocrisy. They're one of the most vocal advocates of sustainability, but at the same time, they're investing funds in corporations and projects that are irreversibly destroying the environment. And I think we're in a situation now where more and more people are saying the right things, but not doing the right things. So we're trying to push them to actual action.
I know we have a lot of children involved in the movement nowadays, a lot of the youth involved with things like the climate strike and Greta Thunberg, who's a spokesperson. What do you think about including the youth in this movement and whether or not that's good for optics purposes?
I think the youth are driving this movement. I don't think it's something like where it's that the adults are pushing the youth to do it. I think, if anything, the youth are waking adults up to our responsibilities. I have children, and I may be okay because of where I live and where I am in my life, but they're definitely not going to be okay. So I think they've woken me up, and I think the children have woken us up to not just admire what young people are doing, but to be the adults that they deserve and to give them the support in the future they deserve.
Many politicians, a la Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, are talking about how we only have like 10 or so years left before we're going to face like some catastrophes on Earth due to climate change. Do you think we only have something like 10 years left, or we're sending a little bit of panic, into the public here?
I think that, that's a little bit misleading, because it's not necessarily that the effects are going to be, the world is going to end in 10 years, but we have 10 years to transform society before it's too late, because the effects of a lot of the things we're doing extend for, the carbon stays in the atmosphere for decades or centuries. On the other hand, it's almost saying 10 years is almost too much time, because that's 10 years to complete a transformation. That's the finish line. We have to start right now. I think it's better to think that, for me, just scientifically, and I haven't done this my whole life. I was a corporate lawyer for my career.
Oh, wow. So I don't know if you should say that around these parts, but yeah.
Well, I think that a lot of people who have followed the science and realized what it says about our society and followed the growth of inequality realize that we don't have 10 years to transform things. If 2020 is not a transformational year for society, then I think we're kind of screwed. So, we have a really kind of even shorter window of time, I think.
I want to follow up with you about the movement specifically. So Extinction Rebellion, they've been putting on a lot of actions worldwide, stopping streets, stopping traffic in streets, stopping trains and things like that. I'm really agitating middle-class, working-class people. Do you think that's the best way to go about trying to activate, voters and middle-class people by, having these protests in the streets, just hanging them up? Because it's not bothering rich people, it's really just bothering working-class people.
Yeah, no, and that is, I think if we can disrupt someone, it should be rich people, and I think that is a focus of coming to Blackrock and people coming to work in these, and decision makers. I think people are trying to send messages in 1,000 different ways. So I personally didn't need to see people like lying in fake blood on the street to get motivated. I read the science, and that was like enough for me. So, we're not just doing that. We're trying to wake people up, trying to disrupt business as usual, and just get people to realize something is going on.